The Iowa sky burned orange as the sun sank behind the endless rows of corn, their brittle stalks whispering in the late September breeze. The air carried the sharp tang of harvested fields and the faint, sour bite of silage from a nearby farm. County Road 17 stretched like a gray scar through the countryside, its cracked asphalt flanked by ditches thick with wild rye and thistle. At the edge of a fallow field, where the Miller house had stood before it burned to ash in 1943, a rusted mailbox leaned crookedly, its flag frozen at half-mast. The charred foundation of the house, overgrown with weeds, was all that remained, a blackened skeleton swallowed by time and neglect. Clara Hensley gripped the steering wheel of her pickup, her knuckles pale against the worn leather. The truck's headlights carved twin beams through the dusk, catching glints of dust motes and the occasional dart of a moth. She was late, as usual, coming back from the feed store in Ames. Her father, Walt, would be pacing the porch of their farmhouse by now, muttering about supper going cold. At 32, Clara still lived in the shadow of the family farm, its 200 acres of corn and soybeans anchoring her to this corner of Iowa like a tether she couldn't cut. She was the last of the Hensleys, the one who stayed when her brothers left for cities and easier lives. Her hands, calloused from baling hay and fixing fences, knew the land better than her heart knew itself. She slowed as she approached the Miller place, a habit born of stories she'd heard since childhood. The fire had been a tragedy, old man Miller, his wife, and their 2 boys, gone in a single night. Faulty wiring, the sheriff had said, though whispers in town spoke of unpaid debts and a stranger seen lurking near the house days before. Clara didn't believe in ghosts, but she'd heard the tales, drivers swearing they saw figures on the road near the ruins, shadowy shapes that vanished when headlights hit them. The police had investigated twice, in 57 and 89, but found nothing. Still, the stories lingered, passed around like worn coins at the diner in Boone. Tonight, the road felt heavier, the air thick with a stillness that made Clara's skin prickle. She glanced at the empty passenger seat, where her father's old flannel lay crumpled. Then her eyes caught something, a flicker of movement at the edge of the light. She slammed on the brakes, the truck lurching as gravel crunched under the tires. Her heart thudded, expecting a deer or a stray dog. But there, just beyond the beam of her headlights, stood a silhouette. It was human-shaped, tall and thin, standing motionless in the middle of the road. The figure's head was tilted, as if listening, its edges blurred against the darkening corn. Clara's breath caught. She leaned forward, squinting, but the shape didn't move. "Hey," she called, her voice sharp in the cab. No response. She flicked on the high beams, and the figure was gone, as if it had never been there. The road stretched empty, the corn swaying innocently. Clara sat frozen, her pulse hammering in her ears. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint tick of the truck's cooling engine and the distant chirp of crickets. She scanned the ditches, the field, the blackened outline of the Miller foundation. Nothing. "Get a grip," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. Long days and short nights were making her see things. She eased her foot off the brake, ready to move on, when something glinted in the ditch to her right. She stopped again, her stomach twisting. Against her better judgment, Clara grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and stepped out. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she approached the ditch, the beam of her flashlight slicing through the gloom. There, tangled in the weeds, was a child's shoe, a small, scuffed sneaker, its laces frayed and caked with mud. It looked recent, not weathered enough to have been there long. Clara's throat tightened. Kids didn't wander out here, not this far from town, not at dusk. She crouched, her fingers hovering over the sneaker. It was a boy's shoe, size small, with a faded Batman logo on the side. Her mind raced. The nearest house was her own, 3 miles away. The Miller place had been abandoned for decades, and the closest town, Boone, was a 20-minute drive. She scanned the field again, half expecting to see that silhouette watching her. The corn stared back, silent and unyielding. Clara pulled her phone from her pocket, but the signal was dead, as it often was out here. She cursed under her breath, the isolation of the countryside pressing in. Tucking the sneaker under her arm, she hurried back to the truck, her flashlight beam bouncing with each step. She locked the doors and drove, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The Miller place receded into the darkness, but the weight of that shoe sat heavy in the passenger seat. When she pulled into the gravel drive of the Hensley farm, the porch light glowed like a beacon. Walt stood waiting, his weathered face creased with irritation. At 68, he was all sinew and stubbornness, his hands gnarled from decades of wrestling the land. "You're late," he growled as Clara climbed out, the sneaker tucked under her jacket. Supper's been ready for an hour. Sorry, Clara said, her voice tight. She hesitated, then held out the sneaker. Found this on County 17, by the Miller place. In the ditch. Walt's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking from the shoe to her face. Kids don't play out there, he said, his tone sharp. You sure it wasn't there this morning? Positive. Clara's voice wavered. And? I saw something. Someone, maybe. Standing in the road. Walt's jaw tightened, but he didn't laugh or dismiss her, as she'd half expected. Instead, he took the sneaker, turning it over in his hands. This ain't good, he muttered, almost to himself. He glanced toward the barn, where the family's old John Deere tractor sat under a tarp, its green paint chipped and fading. You tell anyone yet? No signal out there. Clara followed his gaze, confused. Why? What's wrong? Walt didn't answer right away. He handed the sneaker back, his expression unreadable. Get inside. We'll talk after supper. The kitchen smelled of fried chicken and cornbread, but Clara's appetite was gone. As they ate in silence, her mind churned. Walt knew something, he always did, with his decades of stories about the land, the people, the secrets buried in the soil. He'd grown up hearing about the Miller fire, had known the family before they died. If anyone could make sense of this, it was him. After supper, Clara followed Walt to the porch, where he lit a cigarette, a rare habit he'd picked up again after her mother's death. The night was alive with the hum of cicadas and the distant lowing of cattle. That shoe, Walt said finally, exhaling a plume of smoke. It's not just a shoe. You know the stories about the Miller place. Folks seeing things. Shadows. Clara's skin prickled. You believe that stuff now? I believe what I see, Walt said, his voice low. And I saw something out there once, years ago. After the fire. A figure, just like you said. Gone when I looked twice. He paused, his eyes distant. And I found something too, back then. A toy, a little wooden horse, carved by hand. It was in the ditch, same as your shoe. Clara's breath hitched. You never told me that. Some things you don't tell, Walt said. Not till they matter. Before Clara could press him, headlights flashed in the distance. A pickup truck rattled down the drive, its engine coughing. It was Ellie Boone, the local veterinarian, her short gray hair glinting under the porch light as she stepped out. Ellie was a fixture in the county, her hands as skilled with a calving cow as they were with a sick dog. She'd been friends with Walt for decades, though Clara always sensed a quiet tension between them, like an old wound neither would name. Evening, Ellie called, her voice clipped. She held up a folded piece of paper. Found this taped to my clinic door an hour ago. Thought you should see it. Clara took the paper, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. Scrawled in uneven handwriting was a single sentence. They're still out there, near the Miller place. No signature, no explanation. The paper was creased, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. Who's they? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellie's eyes met Walt's, and something unspoken passed between them. Don't know, Ellie said. But I drove by the Miller place on my way here. Saw lights in the field. Small ones, like lanterns, moving through the corn. Clara's heart stuttered. She looked at Walt, expecting him to dismiss it, but he just stared at the paper, his cigarette burning to ash between his fingers. The night pressed in, the cicadas hummed now a low, ominous drone. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp and frantic, then went silent. We need to go back, Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. Tonight. Walt shook his head. Not tonight. Too dark, too risky. Tomorrow, first light. Clara wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't just caution, it was fear, something she'd never seen in her father before. Ellie nodded, her face grim. I'll come with you, she said. But Clara, you need to be ready for what we might find. As Ellie's truck disappeared down the drive, Clara stood on the porch, the sneaker still clutched in her hands. The Miller place loomed in her mind, its blackened foundation hiding secrets the land refused to give up. Who had left the shoe? Who had written the note? And what were those lights moving through the corn? The night stretched on, vast and unyielding, and Clara knew sleep wouldn't come. Tomorrow, they'd go back to the Miller place. Tomorrow, they'd start looking for answers. But as she stared into the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was already watching them. The first light of dawn crept over the Iowa horizon, painting the cornfields in shades of gold and shadow. Clara Hensley stood on the porch of the family farmhouse, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. The scent of dew-soaked earth mingled with the faint, acrid tang of last night's cigarette smoke lingering on her jacket. The child's sneaker sat on the kitchen table inside, its Batman logo staring up like an accusation. Beside it lay the cryptic note Ellie Boone had brought, "They're still out there, near the Miller place." Clara's fingers twitched, itching to do something, anything, to unravel the knot of unease tightening in her chest. Walt emerged from the barn, his worn Carhartt jacket slung over one shoulder, a thermos of coffee in his hand. At 68, he moved with the deliberate slowness of a man who'd spent his life wrestling the land into submission, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon like a hawk. Ellie's truck rumbled up the drive, its headlights still on despite the growing light. She stepped out, her vet's kit slung over her shoulder, her face set in a grim line. "Ready?" she asked, her voice low, as if the corn itself might be listening. Clara nodded, though her stomach churned. The Miller place waited 3 miles down County Road 17, its blackened foundation a scar on the landscape. Last night's encounter, the silhouette in the road, the sneaker in the ditch, the note, had left her sleepless, her mind spinning with questions. Who were they? What were those lights Ellie had seen? And why did Walt, who scoffed at ghost stories, look so rattled? The three piled into Walt's old Ford, the cab smelling of motor oil and straw. Clara sat in the back, the sneaker tucked into a plastic bag beside her. The truck rattled along the road, passing fields of corn that stretched like an endless sea, their stalks rustling in the morning breeze. The Miller place came into view, its collapsed chimney jutting from the weeds like a broken tooth. Walt parked near the rusted mailbox, and they stepped out, the gravel crunching under their boots. The air was heavy with the scent of charred wood, even after all these years. Clara's eyes traced the outline of the foundation, its stones blackened and cracked. The cornfield beyond it loomed tall, its rows dense and impenetrable, swallowing the light. "Where'd you see those lights?" she asked Ellie, her voice cutting through the stillness. Ellie pointed to the field's eastern edge, where the corn met a dry creek bed. "There." Flickering, like someone carrying lanterns. 3, maybe 4, moving slow. Walt grunted, his gaze fixed on the field. "Nobody farms that land. Been fallow since the fire. Too rocky, too cursed, folks say." Clara shot him a look. "You don't believe that." "Don't I?" Walt's voice was low, his eyes distant. He pulled a pocketknife from his jacket and started toward the creek bed. "Let's start there." They spread out, Clara taking the ditch where she'd found the sneaker, Walt and Ellie heading toward the creek. Clara's boots sank into the soft earth, the grass slick with dew. She scanned the ground, her flashlight catching glints of quartz in the dirt. The sneaker had been here, half buried in the weeds, but now the ditch looked undisturbed, as if the land had swallowed any trace of last night. She crouched, running her fingers through the grass, and froze. There, pressed into the mud, was a footprint, small, like a child's, but deeper than it should be, as if someone had stood there for a long time, watching. "Walt," she called, her voice sharp. He and Ellie hurried over, their faces tightening as they saw the print. Ellie knelt, her fingers hovering over the edges. "Fresh," she said. "Made last night, maybe early this morning. Ground still damp." Walt's jaw clenched. "Same size as the sneaker?" Clara nodded, her throat tight. "Could be." They followed the creek bed, the footprints trail leading into the corn. The stalks closed around them, their leaves brushing Clara's arms like whispering fingers. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer, as if the field itself were holding its breath. Clara's heart thudded, her mind flashing to the silhouette she'd seen last night. She gripped her flashlight tighter, though the morning sun made it useless. Ellie stopped suddenly, her hand raised. "Listen," she whispered. A faint sound drifted through the corn, a low, rhythmic creak, like a door swinging on rusty hinges. Clara's skin prickled. "That's not the wind," she said. Walt pushed ahead, his knife glinting as he parted the stalks. They emerged into a small clearing, no more than 10 feet across, where the corn had been flattened in a rough circle. In the center stood a wooden post, weathered and gray, with something nailed to it. Clara's breath caught as she approached. It was a child's drawing, faded but intact, showing a house with flames licking its walls. Stick figures stood outside, their faces blank, their hands joined in a circle. Below the drawing, scratched into the wood, were the words, "They never left." Clara's stomach twisted. "This is recent," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The paper's not even damp." Ellie's face paled. "That's the Miller house," she said, pointing to the drawing. "I've seen old photos. The shape of the roof, the chimney, it's exact." Walt's hand tightened on his knife. "Nobody's been out here," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He glanced at the corn, as if expecting something to step out. Clara's mind raced. The sneaker, the footprint, the note, now this drawing, it was too much for coincidence. "We need to call the sheriff," she said. "No signal," Ellie reminded her, holding up her phone. "And the sheriff won't come out here again. Not after 89. They'll say it's kids playing pranks." "Then we keep looking," Clara said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her. "Whoever left this knows something." They searched the clearing, finding nothing but more flattened corn and a faint trail leading deeper into the field. Walt's face grew darker with each step, his silence heavy. Clara knew he was holding something back, something about the Miller fire, about the wooden horse he'd found years ago. She wanted to press him, but the creaking sound came again, louder now, from the direction of the ruins. They followed it, emerging near the foundation. The creaking was coming from a rusted metal hatch half buried in the weeds, its hinges groaning as the wind nudged it. Clara's heart sank. She'd walked this land her whole life and never seen a hatch. "What is that?" she asked. Walt crouched beside it, his fingers tracing the edges. "Storm cellar," he said. "Old one. Didn't know the Millers had one." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that, Walt?" He didn't answer, just pulled the hatch open with a screech. The darkness below swallowed the light, revealing a set of concrete steps descending into shadow. A musty smell wafted up, like damp earth and something sharper, almost metallic. Clara's flashlight beam caught cobwebs and a glint of something metal at the bottom, a tin can, maybe, or a tool. "We're not going down there," Ellie said, her voice tight. "Not without more light, more people." Clara wanted to agree, but the drawing burned in her mind. They never left. "We can't just walk away," she said. "What if someone's down there? A kid?" Walt stood, his face unreadable. "We come back with gear. Ropes, lanterns, maybe a gun. This ain't a game, Clara." Before she could argue, a shout cut through the air. They turned to see a figure sprinting across the field, a boy, no older than 12, his face pale and streaked with dirt. He skidded to a stop, his eyes wide with panic. "You can't be here," he shouted. "They'll see you." "Who?" Clara demanded, stepping toward him. "Who's they?" The boy's eyes darted to the hatch, then back to the corn. "The ones who stay," he whispered. He turned and bolted, vanishing into the stalks before Clara could stop him. She spun to Walt and Ellie, her heart racing. "We have to find him." Walt grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Not now. He's scared, and he knows this land better than us. We'll lose him in there." Ellie nodded, her face grim. "He's right. But that kid, he's not from town. I know every family in Boone, and he's not one of ours." Clara's mind reeled. A child's sneaker, a footprint, a drawing, a hidden cellar, and now a boy who knew too much. The Miller place wasn't just haunted by stories, it was hiding something real, something that had been here since the fire, maybe longer. She looked at Walt, expecting answers, but he was staring at the hatch, his face pale. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, her voice low. Walt's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw fear in them. "Later," he said. "We need to get back, get supplies. This ain't over." As they headed to the truck, Clara glanced back at the corn, the hatch, the drawing. The creaking had stopped, but the silence felt worse, like the calm before a storm. The boy's words echoed in her mind, "They'll see you." Whoever they were watching. And Clara had the sinking feeling that she'd just stepped into something she couldn't walk away from. The Iowa morning was heavy with mist, the cornfields around the Hensley farm shrouded in a gray veil that muffled sound and blurred the horizon. Clara stood in the barn, her hands busy coiling rope, but her mind was 3 miles away at the Miller place. The child's sneaker, the cryptic note, the drawing of the burning house, the hidden cellar, and the boy's panicked warning, "They'll see you," swirled in her thoughts like leaves in a storm. The air smelled of hay and motor oil, but beneath it lingered the faint, acrid memory of the metallic scent from the cellar hatch. Clara's stomach churned. She hadn't slept, and the weight of unanswered questions pressed harder with each passing hour. Walt was at the workbench, sharpening a machete with slow, deliberate strokes. The grind of the whetstone filled the barn, a rhythmic scrape that set Clara's nerves on edge. He hadn't spoken much since they'd returned from the Miller place yesterday, his silence a wall she couldn't breach. Ellie Boone was due any minute, her truck's familiar rumble a promise of answers, or more questions. They'd agreed to go back to the cellar, armed with lanterns, rope, and Walt's old hunting rifle. Clara wasn't sure what they'd find, but the boy's face, pale and terrified, haunted her. "You gonna tell me what's eating you?" Clara asked, her voice cutting through the barn's quiet. She tied off the rope and set it beside the lanterns. You've been dodging me since last night. Walt's hands paused, the machete glinting in the dim light. Ain't dodging, he said, his voice low. Just thinking. About what? The cellar? The boy? That wooden horse you found years ago? Clara stepped closer, her frustration spilling over. You know something about the Miller place, Dad. Stop pretending you don't. Walt's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, Ellie's truck pulled into the drive. She stepped out, her vet's kit replaced by a backpack stuffed with gear, flashlights, a first aid kit, and a crowbar she'd brought, just in case. Her gray hair was pulled back, her face set with the same grim determination Clara had seen yesterday. Morning, Ellie called, her voice clipped. Brought someone who might help. Behind her, a man climbed out of the truck, tall, wiry, with a weathered face and eyes that darted nervously. Clara recognized him, Tom Carver, the county's only mechanic and a recluse who lived on the edge of Boone. He was in his 50s, his hands stained with grease, his flannel shirt patched at the elbows. Clara had seen him at the diner, always alone, always quiet. What's he doing here? She asked. Ellie glanced at Tom, who shifted uncomfortably. He came to the clinic this morning, she said. Said he saw something last night, near the Miller place. Figured we could use his eyes. Tom cleared his throat, his voice rough. Was driving home from a job in Ames. Saw lights again, same as Ellie. Moving through the corn, like someone pacing. Thought it was kids at first, but, he trailed off, his gaze dropping to the ground. But what? Clara pressed, her heart quickening. Tom hesitated, then pulled a crumpled photograph from his pocket. It was old, faded, showing a family of 4 standing in front of a house, the Miller house, before the fire. A man, a woman, and 2 boys, their faces solemn. Found this in my truck this morning, Tom said. Tucked under the wiper. Don't know how it got there. Clara's breath caught. The photo was pristine, untouched by weather, as if it had been placed hours ago. She looked at Walt, expecting a reaction, but he was staring at the photo, his face pale. You recognize them? She asked. Walt nodded, his voice barely audible. The Millers. That's them. Before, he didn't finish, but he didn't need to. The fire had taken them all, or so the story went. Ellie's eyes narrowed. Tom, you ever been out to the Miller place before last night? Tom shook his head. Not since I was a kid. Used to dare each other to sneak out there, but never saw nothing. Not till now. Clara's mind raced. The sneaker, the drawing, the note, the boy, and now this photo, it was too much, too connected. We're going back, she said, her voice firm. Now. They loaded the truck, Walt slinging the rifle over his shoulder, Ellie checking the lanterns. Tom hesitated, then climbed in, his hands fidgeting. The drive to the Miller place was silent, the mist thickening as they approached. The ruins loomed through the haze, the blackened foundation stark against the green of the corn. Clara's eyes flicked to the ditch where she'd found the sneaker, then to the corn where the boy had vanished. The air felt heavier today, the silence oppressive, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. They started at the cellar hatch, its rusted metal glinting dully. Walt pried it open, the hinges screaming. The same musty, metallic smell wafted up, stronger now. Clara shone her lantern down the steps, revealing a concrete floor littered with debris, broken glass, a rusted shovel, and something that looked like a pile of rags. Stay close, Walt said, his voice tight. He led the way, rifle in hand, the lantern casting long shadows. The cellar was small, no more than 15 feet square, its walls damp and streaked with mold. Clara's beam caught more details, a cracked mirror leaning against one wall, a wooden crate with faded lettering, and a pile of old newspapers, their headlines illegible. She knelt by the rags, her heart pounding, and realized they weren't rags at all, they were clothes, small enough for a child, stained with dirt and something darker. Blood? Ellie asked, her voice sharp as she crouched beside Clara. Clara shook her head, unsure. Could be oil, or mud. Hard to tell in this light. But her gut told her it wasn't mud. She stood, her lantern sweeping the room, and froze. Carved into the wall, barely visible under the mold, were names: John, Mary, Caleb, Eli. The Millers. Tom made a choked sound, backing toward the stairs. This ain't right, he muttered. We shouldn't be here. Walt ignored him, his eyes fixed on the names. They built this cellar for storms, he said, almost to himself. But nobody knew it was here. Not even the sheriff, back in 43. Clara's skin prickled. You knew about it, didn't you? Walt's silence was answer enough. He turned away, his lantern catching something in the corner, a small, wooden box, its lid carved with the same flame pattern as the drawing they'd found. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a collection of objects, a pocket watch, stopped at 2:17, a woman's hairpin, bent and tarnished, and a child's toy, a wooden horse, identical to the one Walt had described. "Dad," Clara said, her voice shaking. "You need to start talking." Before Walt could answer, a sound echoed from above, a low, rhythmic thump, like footsteps circling the hatch. They froze, lanterns dimmed, listening. The thumping stopped, replaced by a faint, childlike hum, eerie and out of place. Clara's heart raced. She glanced at Ellie, who gripped the crowbar tightly, and Tom, who looked ready to bolt. "It's him," Clara whispered. "The boy." Walt shook his head. "Stay here." He climbed the steps, rifle raised, and peered out. The humming stopped, and the silence that followed was worse. Walt ducked back down, his face grim. "Nobody's there. But the corn's moving. Something's out there." Clara's mind spun. The boy, the lights, the objects in the box, they were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. She looked at Walt, his secrets weighing heavier than ever. "We're not leaving until we find that boy," she said. "Or whatever's out there." They emerged from the cellar, the mist thicker now, curling around the corn like ghostly fingers. The field was silent, but Clara felt eyes on her, hidden in the stalks. They searched the area around the hatch, finding fresh footprints, small, like the boy's, but joined by others, larger, heavier. Ellie traced one with her finger. "These are new," she said. "Someone's been here since yesterday." Tom's voice cracked. "I told you, we shouldn't be here. This place, it's wrong." Clara ignored him, her eyes scanning the corn. The humming started again, faint but closer, coming from deeper in the field. She took a step toward it, but Walt grabbed her arm. "Not yet," he said. "We need more than lanterns and a rifle. We need to know what we're walking into." Clara pulled free, her frustration boiling over. "Then tell me what you know. Why do you keep shutting me out?" Walt's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something break in him. "Because I was there," he said, his voice barely audible. "The night of the fire. I saw something I shouldn't have." Before Clara could demand more, the humming stopped, and a scream tore through the air, a child's scream, raw and terrified, coming from the heart of the corn. Clara's blood ran cold. She didn't wait for Walt or Ellie. She ran toward the sound, her lantern swinging, the corn swallowing her whole. The knocking came again, faster now, echoing in the dark. Clara's lantern flickered out, leaving only Ellie's beam to cut through the shadows. The cellar felt smaller, the walls closing in. Somewhere above, the corn rustled, and a child's voice whispered, too faint to make out. Clara's blood ran cold. They weren't alone. The air in the cellar was suffocating, thick with the stench of mold and that sharp, metallic tang that clung to Clara's throat. The knocking above the hatch had stopped, but the silence was worse, heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. Clara's hands shook as she gripped Caleb Miller's diary, its pages brittle under her fingers. The words she'd read, "He comes at night. Says we can't tell. Says he'll hurt us if we do," burned in her mind, each syllable a thread tying the present to the night of the Miller fire in 1943. Her lantern was dead, and Ellie's beam cast jagged shadows across the concrete walls, making the carved names, John, Mary, Caleb, Eli, seem to flicker like ghosts. Walt stood by the hatch, his rifle aimed at the rusted metal, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Ellie clutched her crowbar, her eyes darting to the stairs, while Tom pressed himself against the wall, his breathing ragged. The hatch was sealed, locked from the outside, trapping them in the dark with secrets that refused to stay buried. Clara's heart pounded, her mind racing to piece together the clues, the child's sneaker, the cryptic note, the drawings, the key, the boy in the corn, and now this diary. And Walt's confession, that he'd seen a man fleeing the Miller fire, a man who wasn't supposed to be there. "We need to get out," Clara said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her. She shoved the diary into her jacket and tested the hatch again, her shoulder straining against the unyielding metal. It didn't budge. Ellie's lantern swept the cellar, searching for another exit. "There's got to be a weak spot," she said, her voice tight. "These old cellars sometimes had back doors, for emergencies." Tom's voice cracked. "We're not supposed to be here. That boy, he warned us." "Enough," Walt snapped, his eyes flashing. "We're not dying in a damn cellar." He handed the rifle to Clara and began prying at the hatch with his pocketknife, the blade scraping uselessly against the rusted bolts. Clara's fingers tightened around the rifle, its weight cold and unfamiliar. She turned to Ellie. Check the walls. If there's another way out, we'll find it. Ellie nodded, her crowbar tapping along the concrete, searching for hollow spots. Clara joined her, running her hands over the damp walls, her fingers brushing the carved names. The metallic smell grew stronger, almost overpowering, and she realized it wasn't just the air, it was coming from the pile of child's clothes in the corner. She knelt, her stomach twisting, and lifted a stained shirt. Beneath it was a small, rusted tin, its lid sealed tight. The smell hit her like a wave, sharp and coppery. Blood. Ellie, Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Look at this. Ellie crouched beside her, her lantern illuminating the tin. She pried it open with her crowbar, revealing a bundle of cloth wrapped around something heavy. Clara's breath caught as Ellie unfolded it, a human bone, small, likely a child's, stained with age and something darker. Tucked beside it was a folded piece of paper, yellowed but intact. Clara unfolded it, her hands shaking. It was a letter, dated September 1943, written in the same childish scrawl as the diary. He said he'd take us away. Said we'd be safe. But he lied. He locked us here. Caleb. Clara's blood ran cold. She looked at Walt, who was still struggling with the hatch. Dad, she said, her voice breaking. This changes everything. Walt turned, his face pale as he saw the bone and the letter. He crossed the cellar in 2 strides, snatching the paper from Clara's hand. His eyes scanned it, and something in him seemed to collapse. God damn it, he whispered. I knew it wasn't just a fire. Talk, Clara demanded, her voice sharp. No more half-truths. What did you see that night? Walt's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. I told you about the man in the coat. But there was more. I heard screams, kids' screams, like the one today. I thought it was the fire, but they came from the field, not the house. I was too scared to follow. By the time the fire trucks came, the screams were gone, and the house was ash. Ellie's face hardened. You think the Millers didn't die in the fire? That they were taken? Walt nodded, his voice barely audible. I think that man locked them somewhere. Maybe here, in this cellar. And I think he's still out there. Clara's mind reeled. The major twist hit her like a thunderclap. The Miller family hadn't burned in the fire. They'd been taken, hidden, maybe killed, and the fire was a cover. The sneaker, the boy, the drawings, they weren't ghosts or pranks. They were cries for help, echoes of a crime buried for decades. And the man Walt saw, the one who'd locked Caleb in the cellar, was still here, still watching. Before she could speak, a loud crack echoed from above. The hatch shuddered, and a sliver of daylight broke through as it was pried open. Clara's heart leapt, expecting rescue, but the figure that appeared was no savior. It was the boy from the corn, his face pale and streaked with dirt, his eyes wide with fear. Behind him stood a man, tall, thin, wearing a heavy coat despite the autumn warmth. His face was shadowed, but his eyes glinted like polished stone. Get back! Walt shouted, grabbing the rifle from Clara and aiming it at the man. The boy darted forward, slipping past the man and down the steps. You shouldn't have come, he whispered, his voice trembling. He knows you're here. The man didn't move, his silhouette framed against the misty sky. You've seen too much, he said, his voice low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. Just like they did. Clara's heart stopped. She recognized that voice, not from memory, but from instinct, a primal fear that told her this was the man Walt had seen all those years ago. The one who'd started the fire. The one who'd locked the Millers away. Ellie raised her crowbar, stepping in front of Clara. Who are you? She demanded. What do you want? The man tilted his head, a smile curling his lips. What I've always wanted. To keep it buried. He reached into his coat, and Clara braced for a weapon, but he pulled out another drawing, this one showing the cellar, with 4 stick figures trapped inside, flames above them. He tossed it down the steps, where it landed at Clara's feet. Tom screamed, scrambling up the stairs, but the man moved faster, slamming the hatch shut with a deafening clang. The lock clicked, and darkness swallowed them again, Ellie's lantern the only light. The boy huddled in the corner, his eyes fixed on the drawing. He's never gone, he whispered. He's always been here. Clara's mind raced, piecing it together. The boy wasn't just a runaway, he was connected to the Millers, maybe a descendant, maybe something else. And the man in the coat wasn't just a ghost story. He was real, and he'd been guarding this secret for decades, silencing anyone who got too close. The bone, the diary, the drawings, they were proof of a crime that never ended. We're getting out, Clara said, her voice fierce. She grabbed the crowbar from Ellie and attacked the hatch, her muscles burning as she pried at the bolts. Walt joined her, his knife digging into the rusted metal. The boy watched, his eyes hollow, and whispered, "He'll come back. He always does." Ellie knelt beside the boy, her voice gentle but firm. "Who is he? Tell us." The boy's lips trembled. "I don't know his name. But he was there when my mom disappeared. She found the cellar, too." Clara froze, the crowbar slipping in her hands. "Your mom? When?" "Last year," the boy said, his voice breaking. "She was looking for them. The Millers. She said they never left." The cellar seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. Clara's eyes met Walt's, and she saw the truth in his face. The man in the coat wasn't just tied to 1943. He'd been here, year after year, hiding his crime, silencing anyone who came close to the truth. And now they were trapped with it. A low thud echoed from above, followed by the sound of footsteps circling the hatch. Clara's heart pounded as she gripped the crowbar tighter. They had the diary, the bone, the drawings, proof of what happened. But proof meant nothing if they didn't get out. And the man in the coat was waiting. The cellar's darkness pressed against Clara like a living thing, the air thick with the metallic stench of blood and secrets. The footsteps above the hatch circled slowly, deliberate, each thud a hammer against her resolve. Caleb Miller's diary lay heavy in her jacket, its childish scrawl a testament to a family betrayed, locked away, and erased by fire. The child's bone in the rusted tin, the drawings pinned to scarecrows and posts, the boy's whispered warnings, all pointed to the man in the coat, a shadow who'd guarded his crime for decades. Clara's hands gripped the crowbar, her knuckles white, as she stood shoulder to shoulder with Walt, Ellie, and the boy, whose name they still didn't know. Tom cowered in the corner, his breath shallow, his eyes darting to the sealed hatch. "We're not dying here," Clara said, her voice cutting through the silence. She attacked the hatch again, the crowbar's edge biting into the rusted bolts. Walt joined her, his pocketknife scraping at the hinges, while Ellie's lantern cast a flickering glow over the concrete walls. The boy watched, his face pale, his eyes too old for his years. "He'll come back," he whispered. "He always does." "Then we'll be ready," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She handed the boy her flashlight, its beam weak but steady. "You know this place. Is there another way out?" The boy hesitated, then pointed to the cracked mirror leaning against the wall. "Behind it," he said. "There's a tunnel. Mom found it before she was gone." Clara's heart leapt. She and Walt shoved the mirror aside, revealing a jagged hole in the concrete, barely wide enough for a person. The air from within was colder, carrying the damp scent of earth and decay. "A tunnel," Walt muttered, his face grim. This wasn't just a storm cellar. Clara shone Ellie's lantern into the hole, revealing a narrow passage, its walls reinforced with rotting timbers. "It must lead to the field," she said. "Maybe the creek." She looked at the boy. "You've been through it?" He nodded, his voice barely audible. "Once. With Mom. It's tight, but it goes somewhere." Walt grabbed the rifle, his eyes hard. "I'll go first. Clara, you're behind me. Ellie, keep the boy close. Tom, you're last." Tom shook his head, his voice trembling. "I'm not going in there. You saw that man. He's waiting." "Then stay here and rot," Ellie snapped, her patience gone. She handed Tom the crowbar, her eyes daring him to argue. He took it, his hands shaking. They crawled into the tunnel, Walt's broad shoulders scraping the walls. Clara followed, the diary pressing against her chest, the key in her pocket a cold weight. The passage was claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of wet soil and something fouler, like rotting flesh. The boy's flashlight flickered behind her, Ellie's steady breathing a small comfort. The tunnel sloped upward, the timbers creaking under their weight. Clara's mind raced. The man in the coat had locked the Millers here, burned their house to cover it, and now he was hunting them to keep the secret buried. The tunnel ended at a wooden hatch, its planks warped but intact. Walt pushed it open, revealing a patch of starry sky framed by cornstalks. They emerged into the field, 100 yards from the Miller ruins, the mist gone but the air heavy with the promise of rain. The corn loomed tall, its leaves rustling in the night breeze, a chorus of whispers that hid the man's footsteps. Clara's eyes scanned the field, expecting his silhouette, but the night was empty, too empty. "We need to get to the truck," Walt said, his rifle raised. Then the sheriff. The boy grabbed Clara's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "He's watching," he whispered. "He knows the field better than anyone." Clara knelt, meeting his eyes. "What's your name?" "Eli," he said, his voice breaking. "Like the Miller boy. Mom named me after him. She said we were tied to them." Clara's breath caught. Eli, a descendant, maybe, or a child caught in the same web of lies. She stood, her resolve hardening. We're getting you out, Eli. All of us. They moved through the corn, Walt leading, his rifle sweeping the shadows. The ruins were visible in the distance, the blackened foundation a stark outline under the moon. Clara's heart pounded, her senses alive to every rustle, every snap of a stalk. They were halfway to the truck when a figure stepped into their path, the man in the coat, his face no longer shadowed. He was old, older than Walt, his skin weathered like leather, his eyes cold and unyielding. In his hand was a hunting knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. You shouldn't have come back, he said, his voice the same gravelly rasp from the cellar. The Millers learned. So did the boy's mother. Walt raised the rifle, his hand steady. Drop the knife, Amos. Clara froze. You know him? Walt's voice was low, laced with decades of guilt. Amos Crane. Lived on the edge of Boone in 43. Worked for the Millers, tending their fields. I saw him that night, running from the fire. Amos smiled, a cold, crooked thing. You were always a coward, Walt. Saw me and ran. Never told a soul. Clara's mind reeled. The man in the coat wasn't a ghost, he was real, living among them all these years, hiding in plain sight. Why, she demanded. Why the Millers? Why lock them in that cellar? Amos's eyes flicked to Eli, then back to Clara. They knew too much. John Miller found my ledger, proof I was skimming their profits, selling their grain on the side. He was gonna turn me in. So I made sure he didn't. You killed them, Ellie said, her voice shaking with rage. A whole family. For money. Not just money, Amos said. Power. This land listens to me now. Always has. He took a step closer, his knife gleaming. And it'll stay quiet, long as you're gone. Clara's hand tightened on the diary. We have proof, she said. The diary, the bone, the drawings. You're done. Amos laughed, a hollow sound. Proof don't mean nothing if you're dead. He lunged, but Walt was faster, firing a warning shot that kicked up dirt at Amos's feet. The old man froze, his eyes narrowing. Clara grabbed Eli, pulling him behind her, while Ellie raised the crowbar. Tom, trembling, stepped forward, clutching the second crowbar like a lifeline. You're outnumbered, Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Walk away, or you're the one who's done. Amos's smile faded, his eyes calculating. For a moment, the field was silent, the corn holding its breath. Then he lowered the knife, his shoulders slumping. You think this ends it? He said. The land keeps its secrets. Always will. He turned and vanished into the corn, his footsteps swallowed by the night. Clara's heart pounded, expecting him to double back, but the field stayed quiet. Walt lowered the rifle, his face etched with exhaustion. We need to move, he said. Now. They reached the truck, piling in with Eli squeezed between Clara and Ellie. Walt drove, the headlights cutting through the dark as they sped toward Boone. Clara clutched the diary, her mind racing. Amos was gone, for now, but the truth was out. The Millers hadn't died in the fire. They'd been murdered, locked in that cellar, their deaths covered by flames. And Eli's mother, searching for answers, had paid the same price. At the sheriff's station, they spilled everything, the sneaker, the drawings, the diary, the bone, Eli's story. The sheriff, a skeptical man named Hargrove, listened with growing unease. We'll search the Miller place, he said. And we'll find Crane. He can't hide forever. Clara looked at Eli, his small hand clutching hers. What about him? Hargrove sighed. We'll track down any family. For now, he stays with social services. Eli's eyes met Clara's, and she saw the weight of his loss, the mother who died chasing the truth, the legacy of a family erased. You're not alone, she told him, her voice soft. We'll make sure of it. As dawn broke over Boone, the sheriff's deputies swarmed the Miller place, uncovering more in the cellar, 3 more bones, a woman's locket, and a ledger hidden in the tunnel, its pages detailing Amos's thefts. Amos himself was gone, his small house on the edge of town empty, but the evidence was enough. The Miller's story, and Eli's mother's, would be told. Back at the farm, Clara sat on the porch with Walt, the diary between them. The cornfields stretched under the rising sun, their secrets lighter now, but not gone. You carried this too long, Clara said, her voice gentle. You should have told someone. Walt nodded, his eyes distant. I was a kid. Scared. And then it was too late. He paused, his voice breaking. But you didn't run. You faced it. Clara's throat tightened. The lesson wasn't just about truth, it was about courage, about facing the past to protect the future. Eli was safe, the miller's story was out, but Amos was still out there, a shadow in the corn. The land might keep some secrets, but Clara wouldn't let it keep them all. As the sun climbed higher, she looked out at the fields, the scars of the Miller place hidden but not forgotten. The truth had cost them, but it had saved Eli, and maybe others. And that, Clara thought, was enough, for now.